All right. Welcome in everyone to our learning lunch for today. It's MASC Learning Lunch Legislative Update for Spring 2016. I'm just working on sharing my screen here in one moment so you can see our presentation for today. There we go. For those of you that don't know, I'm Anthony Andronico. I'm the operations director here at MASC, and I also happen to be one of the two registered lobbyists for the organization, alongside Glenn Kutra, our executive director, as well. So today we're going to go over where things are in the legislature, a little bit of day on the Hill, some guiding policy principles that we have, our policy goal development timeline, the session timeline for the State House and the House and the Senate, overview of our priorities, additional MASC priorities, what the close of session will look like, and if we get to it, lobbying tips, but we want to make sure that we get to your questions and save some time at the end for you as well. So just a brief overview, in case you're not already registered, you still can register for a Day on the Hill this upcoming Monday. A pivot from last year and the year before is this year will be completely at the State House. We'll be at Gardner Auditorium for the program before we go to the Great Hall for lunch. Just a couple things of note for our timeline is that registration kicks off at 9:30 and will go until 10 o'clock. We'll do a little bit of a welcome, present Legislator of the Year awards, and then go over the actual program itself. We're excited to have Doug Howgate from the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, Senator Lewis, and our rural school champions, Martha Thurber, Jessica Corwin, and their team, Rep. Kathy Lenatra, and then I know our Legislative Committee Chair, Bridget Garabedian, will go over some legislative and budget priorities at the end of the day. So, Glenn, I know you wanted to go over some policy principles for us, right?
Yes. Our public policy is defined by our concern with making sure that there's a meaningful role for school committees in the oversight, financing, and delivery of services in public education. To do that, we want to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table and that everyone has a voice that's heard. Sometimes, if it weren't for the school committee, some of these discussions would never take place. Second, we want to preserve the fiduciary responsibilities of the school committee. That includes budgeting. That's a very important responsibility that democratically goes to the elected legislature for schools, which is the school committee. We also want to end receiverships in school districts. Quite frankly, the state hasn't been very successful in dealing with receiverships, and the ones that we have just discharged or are about to discharge have been in state hands for 15 years without great or meaningful improvement, but with things improving on their own as well. Also, as I say, we want a seat at the table. If you don't have a seat at the table, you sometimes end up on the menu, and that's not a good place to be. Generally, we're looking at the Student Opportunity Act and the reauthorization of that bill. We're looking at an inflation index to be built into the foundation budget. We're looking at funding and adequate funding for small and rural school districts. We'd like to see full funding of regional transportation. We'd like to see full funding of the charter school mitigation program to replace the money that's lost to charter schools when they move into your district. And we want to make sure that the circuit breaker is preserved and fully funded as it is now. It's one of the most important parts of our budget that we have, and the state's been very good about that. With regard to policy development, right about now, we're starting to get feedback from our members, what they'd like to see by association policy, what resolutions they'd like to propose for us to debate and bring to the legislature. The legislative committees, the resolutions committee will take everything that comes in. The resolution should be in by by June 1st. They will meet and recommend to the school committee, to the board of directors of MASC, which resolution should go forward. If a resolution comes from five different school committees in two different divisions, it automatically goes to the delegate assembly in November. Otherwise, they go to the board of directors from the resolutions committee, and those resolutions are then proposed to the delegate assembly in the fall. Once the delegate assembly establishes new policies or goals for us, we then put that into either requests for legislation or drafted legislation that we would ask legislators to provide. And in the meantime, once the legislative year begins, we are following those legislative priorities that you have given us, and hope to bring them forward to the governor's desk and become law.
So this is just an overview. We just went over the MASC policy development timeline. This is an overview of the legislature's timeline. And right at the bottom, in that bottom row, is where we're at, right before April, obviously. So the governor has proposed her budget proposal for FY27, and there are only a few more months left until the end of the formal session. That 19-month formal session will end on July 31st. So over the next few months, we're going to see a lot of conference committees on bills where there are disagreements on certain language between the House and the Senate, as I call them, the two political parties here in Massachusetts, to work out the differences between some key bills. And there's obviously a lot going on with the budget, but we just sort of wanted to plug in here the 2-year cycle of the legislature overlapped with the 1-year cycle of how policy is developed for MASC to sort of come together and figure out where we're at within that process. So at the beginning of that 2-year cycle, we had established some 5 key priorities for the session itself. We wanted to adjust Chapter 78 for past and future inflation, improve the fiscal health of rural school districts, expand capacity in vocational technical schools, establish and fund financial literacy curriculum, and support school committees in the superintendent search process. So we're going to go over those 5 today with updates on where those are. And I also want to make sure that folks know that we have 31 resolutions and policy stances at this moment in time. If you go up to the legislature and you ask for all 31 to be to move forward at that particular time, it's a good way to get 0 or none of them moved forward. So wanted to focus on these 5. They're a little bit more major, but that doesn't mean that we're not working on the other 26 priorities that we have. So that first one, adjusting Chapter 78 for past and future inflation. The bills that you see up on the screen were the package that we had identified as addressing the resolution that we had in front of us. So effectively right now, school funding from the state goes up each year based on inflation, but there's a 4.5% cap. So a couple of years ago, inflation was higher than that 4.5% cap, and that extra percentage of inflation simply is not accounted for. And in subsequent years, as of now, the legislature can't go back and get that lost money and carry it forward for future years. It's simply lost to the formula itself. So the legislation that's up on the screen, that top part, H678 and S388, were identified as the legislative package that would allow for those kind of carryover years moving forward, where that lost funding would be able to be brought back. And separately, a different bill, one was proposed by Senator DiDomenico that would have eliminated the inflation cap altogether. So between those 2 areas, we thought that the legislature may move forward with a concept of it. So now that it's been, a year and a half into that process, effectively what has happened is those bills did move forward. They were reported favorably out of committee, but with some heavy editing through the committee process. So those bills now no longer immediately go into effect and establish the original intent of what those bills had said. Instead, they would each seek to establish a legislative commission that would produce a report 1 year after its establishment about this particular topic. It's important to note, and we'll talk about it later too, that bills usually take 3 full formal sessions to actually be accomplished. And that's if they are perceived to be favorable to those in the legislature. So this is the first time that this has been filed. So we're closing in on the first formal session through that 3 session timeline of when things can become law. So overall, I would say that we're in a good place related to these, but we are urging that the new redrafted bills that set up a commission, H555 and S400, be moved forward through the committee process. They're both in their respective Ways and Means Committee. So those are the bills that we would like our membership to push to try to get them passed before the end of the session. And Glenn, I know you were going to talk about
Yes.
fiscal health for rural districts.
Major priority for us is to help secure stable, predictable, and meaningful financial aid and regulation for our small and rural districts. We would propose to do this and support an agenda in the following ways. Number one, we want $60 million of additional school aid for rural schools. The legislature is not quite to that level yet, and we'd like to see that happening. We need to do some things to help districts that are suffering from declining enrollment, but enrollment which doesn't affect the expenses that they have. If you've got 21 students in a class or 19 students in a class, you still have to have the class, you still have to have the teacher. We're looking for DESE to develop an office of shared services to help districts collaborate, to work together voluntarily on what's best for a region of districts as opposed to compulsory or mandated regionalization. We want that locally left to the cities and towns, particularly the towns. We're looking for regionalization grants to provide an incentive to districts to find a way to work together more effectively or to regionalize if that's what the community wants. We have a special education workforce proposition, which includes pathways for professionals and funding a system review. Transportation reimbursements, particularly for rural districts. Rural districts are supposed to be funded at 100% for transportation. The legislature gets there from time to time. They have not yet been able to get there at this point this year. We recognize they do their best. We recognize a lot of different agencies need funding. We just want to put that out there as a priority and make sure that the legislators hear from you. And finally, rural representation. There's nobody on the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education that represents a small and rural community, and there are a number of them in Massachusetts. So we would love to see the board expanded or to include someone from a small or rural district.
Before I continue with the status update here, I just wanted to make sure that folks knew that if they have questions throughout the presentation, if they want to drop them in the Q&A so that Glenn and I can answer them as they come up, or we can save questions to the end, but just wanted to let folks know that that's part of the reason that we're here today. So just the status update on the rural schools bill. We did have a little bit of an unexpected hiccup where was it Rep. Blaze did resign. She went and took a position with UMass Amherst, and we're very happy for her, but that sort of leaves the rural schools bill legislative champion in the House at least sort of TBD for right now. The last I had checked, this bill, the House bill, along with plenty of other House bills, had a reporting deadline out of committee that was extended through March 18th, which was a few days ago. But the last that I had checked, there was not a status update on if the rural schools bill is moving forward, if they're extending the deadline again, or if they have just yet to report the vote after as well. Did see here a question. Yes, the slides will be available after as well as the recording as a note. So the rural schools bill itself, I mean, the definition, I think it's over a third of the communities in Massachusetts qualify as small and rural. Glenn, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but we're continuing to push the bill in the Senate and in the House to try to get the full recommendations from the 22 Special Commission on board. The governor's budget funded this line item for rural school aid at 20 million. We're happy to see that it increased 8 million year over year, at least in her proposal. But that's still well shy of the $60 million recommendation. And I just want to put in a plug for Jessica and Martha, who are our champions on this out in rural Mass, and we'll be giving a more formal discussion on this particular topic at Day on the Hill on Monday. And Glenn, I've got you for vocational schools.
Massachusetts has and is recognized as having the best vocational technical school system or school network in the country. People, when I visit other places or especially conferences, are asking, what's the secret formula? How does it happen? How did it get this way? Well, it got this way because the legislature was generous in getting vocational technical schools started, and we believe that $300 million is necessary in order to continue to expand vocational technical opportunities for kids. These are kids who get a vocational education that's solid, an academic presentation, an academic experience to go with it, and they get jobs and they go to college and they become successful. This success should be shared. We're also looking for district flexibility and collaboration, less regulation, more voluntary collaboration so that we can develop programs that are best suited to the workforce. We'd like to see students in middle schools have an opportunity to visit the VOTEC schools, get a chance to see what the programs look like, and consider that as an option. And we're supporting a more generous way of funding vocational and technical expansion by having the school building authority increase the percentage of available funds to make more of these programs available. The school building authority has an enviable record of integrity and diligence in finding out where this money should go, but they're limited in how much money they can put out there. We'd like to see more money made available to them.
So on that note, I had mentioned earlier the Chapter 78 bill in particular and how it had changed drastically through the committee process. I would say that this set of bills has gone through a similar transformation. So through committee process, each of the bills I think in the House and in the Senate removed the sections that were related to the grant program, which would have actually made a dent in physically expanding capacity in our vocational technical schools. And it removed the sections related to the reimbursement rate from 20% to 90%, removed that as well. So they did keep the sections relating to DESE promulgating new regulations that ensured wider access to middle schools for Chapter 74 programs. For those that have been following along, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Ed has been involved in that already. But as of now, each of these bills remains in their respective Ways and Means Committee, although the actual teeth, I'd say, of the bill and a main driver as to why we had supported the original bill is no longer a part of that process. Couple other things that we have for key priorities were to establish and fund financial literacy curriculum. We'd identified a bill from Treasurer Goldberg and Senator Patrick O'Connor that related to this particular goal. Basically, the concept was that financial literacy should be taught in elementary, middle, and high school. The bills would establish a financial literacy trust fund that would support curriculum and teacher training, prioritized underserved districts and those without financial education in place. Made sure that DESE managed that fund, the Financial Literacy Trust Fund, with annual reporting to the legislature on an update on how the fund is working, and that it would take effect 1 year after its passage. Now, this one in particular, we've actually seen significant movement on. The House had multiple bills filed on this, and that's not uncommon that a particular topic will have a lot of sponsors, a lot of authors who all have their own take. The gist, though, that in the House is those bills were all consolidated and they passed a financial literacy bill, which ended up being H4670, and it passed last October in 2025. So that is really good news for us that we've made significant strides in the legislative process, and we even passed the legislation in one chamber. So as of now, we're looking towards the Senate to pass its version of the bill so that we can get this signed by the governor before the end of this session, July 31. So that bill in the Senate is S421 filed by Senator O'Connor, and there may be another bill here or there related to the same issue, but similarly to what the House did, the Senate is most likely to consolidate these bills if they need to and move them forward. So we're really hoping that this one in particular can move forward, and it's really important that we continue our advocacy efforts over the next few months to make sure that this gets passed. Another item that we've had that I know, Glenn, you've been definitely more involved with is related to supporting school committees in the superintendent search process. So this particular bill, and the bills you see up on your screen here, would allow executive sessions if the school committee determines that an open meeting would hinder the process of finding qualified candidates, enables all members of your school committee to participate in these meetings and interviews, and applies to screening and search committees. Basically, as of now, those of you who have been through a superintendent search process know that for the screening committee or search committee, however you call it, that you're not allowed to have a quorum or a majority of your school committee members be a part of that screening and search committee. We feel as though that was an oversight related to the executive session law and open meeting law, and that this bill in particular would be a fix to that problem that currently exists for school committee member input in the superintendent search process. So the status update on this particular item, unfortunately, the House bill did get consolidated and moved forward. And I say unfortunately because there was some heavy editing done again. And although it technically moved forward and had a favorable report, all of the language that was a part of that bill was completely removed from the new bill. It does not exist in the new version of that House bill, which is H4831. The new bill in the House is actually related to virtual meetings and Zoom as part of public meetings and formalizing that particular process. So the gist, though, is in the House, it does not have a chance to move forward through the traditional avenue. So we would need to pivot to an alternative way to move this forward if we wanted to see this passed this session, which would effectively mean in the budget. That is the avenue to get this passed in the House. In the Senate, the bill was filed by Senator Jake Oliveira. It is still in the Committee on Ways and Means, so we can push for that to move forward. But at the same time, the bill needs to pass in the House. A version of the bill needs to pass in the House and pass in the Senate. They're accompanying bills. And considering that that's not going to happen in the House, the Senate could move it forward, and we would like to see that. But for this to be signed into law this session is highly unlikely, although it would be nice to set a benchmark in the Senate to get it passed, to at least say next session, you passed it last session. This should remain a priority for you, and we can move forward from that point. So, Glenn, I know we've got some additional policy goals outside of just those five key things that we'd mentioned?
Yes. There are some things that our delegate assembly has also set forth for our public policy goals, and these are goals that we are aligned with and feel good about. First of all, the state is in the process of developing a replacement to the traditional MCAS program in that it had a high school graduation test as a high stakes component. We opposed that strongly with question two from the last election. We opposed it because we didn't need to have something that draconian when there were so many healthier, more constructive, less punitive alternatives. So we're hoping that as the work group begins to advise the Secretary and Commissioner of Education about what MCAS should look like, we're looking for a meaningful alternative that is not easy to pass if you're a student, but sufficiently fair to give you options and pathways to that graduation. We've also had some strong recommendations from our members about increasing the compulsory age of school attendance to 18, unless one graduates prior to age 18. We have a school bus surveillance priority where we would have cameras on school buses available to track those people who like to pass school buses when they're blinking their red lights or when there are kids crossing the street. We're also interested in, as we mentioned earlier, some greater grants to build and expand vocational technical education. We also believe that nothing can happen until we're able to deal with the eradication of poverty among children and families. The good work in school can be undone if people go home to food insecurity or instability at home. And that's why we have always urged the legislature to be mindful of those agencies aside from the education department that need funding to support children and families. We have an obligation to share, and I think the state has an obligation to do more to get agencies working together. We have a very strong constituency for mandatory recess. Kids need a break during the school day. Increasing the maximum balance for the special education reserve funds. We would like to allow districts to have additional reserve funding for special education in those instances where unpredictable expenses can occur or where a family with high needs can move into a small district and create a severe financial strain on the district to pay for the requirements of complying with their special education plans. We'd like to see a school board member eligible to serve on the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. They are not now eligible to do that. Neither are teachers. It's interesting because it's about the only field of regulation in Massachusetts where the practitioners are excluded deliberately from being members of this. There are doctors on the Board of Registration in Medicine. There are psychologists on the Board of Education in Psychology, and there are barbers on the Board of Barbers. So this is an inconsistency. We'd also like a general regional reserve uh, available for those critical situations and emergencies, such as we're looking at now with insecurity about what's going to happen on the federal end and our small districts being equally or more severely impacted by this. Finally, we're still desperately in need of charter school reform. Charter schools expropriate a significant amount of money. There are some communities that get no Chapter 70 funds because it's all expropriated to charter schools that are not necessarily governed publicly, that are not necessarily governed in a way that's accountable to anyone in the community. We feel, and we've been pretty articulate about explaining what needs to happen, the charter school industry has to be forced to come to terms with the obligation to be more reasonable, and the legislature needs to do something about the fact that charter schools have refused to engage in any kind of reform on their side. So Sorry to get a little acerbic about that, but we've been doing this for a very long time and we're patient.
Right.
Anthony,
And
I think we go back to you.
yeah, so just again, this is just a snapshot of some of the policy goals that we have. This is not the end all be all. We did have one question in the Q&A that I wanted to answer. This is from Nancy. Nancy wants to know, why does it happen that a bill starts out as one thing and is edited to become something unrelated, referencing the superintendent search bill becoming a Zoom meeting bill, and who does that benefit? Uh,
Uh,
I can take this one briefly, is that the committees themselves have oversight responsibilities. And effectively, what that means is they have within committee the authority to redraft or refine language. They, as I had mentioned, can merge similar proposals. So when I'm thinking about the financial literacy bill, there are three or four proposals out there. They said, oh, these are awfully similar. I'm going to merge these, or we're going to merge these and clean up some of the language. They're also allowed to incorporate feedback that they get through the hearing process. So feedback from the public on a particular bill, that maybe there's a small oversight that they had made or the original author of the bill had made, and it didn't come to light until the public hearing, and they want to tweak that in the committee process to try and see if that can move forward still. Um, but basically, that's what they're allowed to do. It's why I'd say advocacy overall needs to happen from the very beginning of session all the way until the end, because at every step of the way, things can go away that you don't expect. And that's why it's important to have relationships with the chairs and the members of, the Joint Committee on Education, on the Ways and Means committees, and any other area that the particular bill that you're interested in may go through. Let's see. I did see another question here from Brent, who wants to know, is there a role for advocacy around the governor's proposed graduation requirements? There is interaction between the MCAS policy and advocacy for financial literacy bills. Glenn, I'm not sure if you're able to jump into
Tax
that
policy
one.
and finance. Well, there is. First of all, around the governor's proposal for graduation requirements, that's going to come at the Board of Education. Is there room for advocacy? We would hope so. We would hope that the legislature would be following this very carefully, because if there's one thing that I can tell you has been consistent in my 50 years of doing this, it's that the Department of Education hasn't shown a lot of respect for the legislature, and they have usurped some of the authority by taking regulatory action that, in this case, we're really worried about that people inside the department may be trying to create something that is more punitive than just a high school graduation test, or more unreasonably crafted. So advocacy needs to, I would say, be articulated. Maybe the governor might be a place to have it. I would say the legislature would be where most of it has to be, because our history with the Department of Education has been, when there's something that needs to happen, they do what they want and they get away with it. The intersection between MCAS policy and financial literacy, there are a lot of ways that financial literacy can be crafted to assist in meeting various mandates for high school graduation in terms of coursework. I do think that financial literacy can be integrated into a lot of successful high school curriculum programs, and it can be a very valuable inclusion as a maybe a semester course for those districts that feel they can do that, with kids getting credit for the mathematics side. Uh, that may be a little convoluted, but I do see a connection.
And then I had one more question from Ellen. Can we please, with buses, add special education vans to be included with the buses? Many cars also pass the special education vans when there are red lights on. Just as a note, that particular item was signed into law at the very beginning of 2025. The legislature passed the bill in, I believe, informal session at the end of December 2024, and the governor signed it just before the start of the new session. So that bill has become law. I would have to double check if the language allows for the cameras to be placed on the special education vans or not. So I would have to double check that, Ellen. All right, moving forward. So we have 4 months left in the formal legislative session in the Massachusetts legislature's timeline. So just as a note for where we're at, we just completed a full review of all 31 of the legislative initiatives that membership at the Delegate Assembly has passed, and we've identified, which of those still have a viable path forward from here on out in the last 4 months. We've put, we've prioritized advocacy on the bills that have some momentum and that leadership is looking to support ahead of the formal session deadlines. We want to make sure that what we're telling membership and even the work that we're doing is going to be worth your while. We want to make sure that we're pushing for things that truly have an opportunity to pass and move forward in the process. At the same time, we're also focusing and shifting focus over to the budget process. So the governor filed in January, and we've identified some priorities that we're looking to see baked directly in to the House Ways and Means budget, which will be proposed in April, and then the Senate Ways and Means budget, which will be proposed in May. And of course, as most of you, I assume, know, is that after the Ways and Means committees propose their budgets, the full House and then the full Senate can submit amendments to that budget. So we're hoping that those budgets will have some of the things that we're looking for just baked directly into them. If not, we will seek out legislators and some of our allies up at the State House to file amendments for particular things. One that I have a feeling may come up is related to rural school aid. The governor proposed that number at 20 million. If I had to guess, I would not be too hopeful that the initial proposals from the House and the Senate will have a full $60 million recommendation. But that might be something that through the amendment process, we can push to get in there. So then, of course, the last thing at the bottom is mobilizing membership. These are priorities that you have all put forward, taken votes on through the delegate assembly. Our priorities are your priorities, and we want to make sure that your voices are heard at key decision points, and that starts, more formally for the close of session on Monday with Day on the Hill. We're up to 300 registrants for Day on the Hill, which we're really excited about. So lobbying as a school committee member. A few years ago, I know the legislative committee for MASC had developed the full lobbying guide, which will be up at Day on the Hill for those that are joining us. But there are a few things that legislators themselves have told us that can help bolster those lobbying efforts. When you go up and visit, it's helpful that they know who you are. So knowing and trusting the person doing the lobbying makes legislators more inclined. Making sure that they get accurate, truthful, and helpful information. Establishing a record of credibility. As Glenn had said, we're patient, and you need to be too throughout this process, is that you can't just go in and ask for something and hope that that's it. Persistence without being obnoxious. It's good to check in every so often, make sure things are still going the way that you're looking for, and hopefully the legislator is perceptive to the overtures to get things going in the right direction. Let me see here. How to make your voice heard. So be visible, go to hearings, testify when you can, engage with the local media to ensure your voice is heard beyond just those one-on-one meetings. You have to be informed. come to webinars like this. But before you contact your legislator, double check their background. So something that we had done was who are all the former school committee members up at the state house who are current legislators? What are their past positions like? Where might we find some overlap in shared goals? And then be concise, get to the point, make sure that you understand that these legislators' times are very valuable and their staff, and get in, get out, be clear, and make sure that they remember your message. Similarly, about building trust, always be truthful and consistent. Don't give them misleading information. Make sure the information is accurate and continue those relationships moving forward. Now, Glenn, I know has talked with staff plenty of times up at the State House, and he talked about being patient. So I'm going to hand this off to him for respect for the process and the staff.
Yeah, only to say this. It can be very difficult to be trying to get something enacted and failing maybe year after year, hoping that there's an opportunity for you to take advantage of some situation to maybe make a better argument. The process is what it is. Change doesn't happen overnight. Most recently, those of you who follow what happens in the Social Security system, Social Security benefits were significantly expanded to Massachusetts residents who are spouses or children or who they themselves have worked in the public sector. There are the penalties for pensions have been lifted. It took 25 years of lobbying by a lot of different organizations to make this happen. And those legislators who made it happen worked with us all of this time waiting for the opportunity. Doesn't always happen as quickly as you would like. But one thing that a lot of people don't understand when they're doing the lobbying, the legislators are important. The staff are very important. And Anthony's been staff in the legislature. Sean Costello and our staff has also been staff. And I previously was staff to a state cabinet officer. And I understand what we did as staff members to inform our legislators or our cabinet secretaries. They rely on staff. Staff can help get things done by being the person who has the ear of the person who takes the action. Be really careful. Show great respect and appreciation for legislators, because if you're not civil, if you're not polite, if you're not sincere, the legislator themselves get very protective of their staff, and rightfully so. So it's a process of respecting everybody in the process. And one other thing that we did not include that I want to add before I forget. An old mentor of mine used to say, never stop looking for an opportunity to take advantage of something that will advance your agenda. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a tragedy, and the legislature reform starts by acting in the sort of anti-tragedy mode. Sometimes it's something that happens in another state. Sometimes the federal government provides incentives that you didn't have before. Sometimes a new chair takes over and a new legislator takes their place. Your perennial opponent now is no longer in the legislature and a potential ally is there. These are things you never want to stop looking for because you never know when they're going to occur. So never stop looking for an opportunity to get your point across. With regards to the media, I would cultivate relationships with the media. Make sure that reporters know they can talk to you about finding out what's going on in your district or what your priorities might be. These are really critical things, and they can help. A good shot on the 7 o'clock news or the 6 o'clock news, whatever it happens to be. There are thousands of people who see that, including members of the legislature. But be really careful in your use of the media that you don't do something that crosses a line. First of all, you don't want to be untruthful. You don't want to use children as props. That's not fair. You leave families out of this unless you're boasting about a great family situation. You never want to humiliate a child by making them public figures, by talking about uh, how how disadvantaged they may be. But cultivating the reporters pays off long term. Everybody who's on television probably started somewhere as a local newspaper reporter, working their way up to the city, working their way to the state, hoping to make their way to 60 Minutes. And you never know when they're going to call you and say, I spoke to you 3 years ago, you were helpful. Give me some help now. Those relationships with reporters and editors are critical. Write letters to the editor if they're succinct. And the last thing I'm going to tell you is when you're lobbying and when you're talking, brief is good. Amen.
So we'll leave you with this is when you go into those meetings with a legislator or their staff, do your best to always leave a one-page summary. You know, oftentimes these discussions can go on for a while, and sometimes things get lost in translation. It's always good to leave a one-page summary of what it is that you are asking for from that particular office. You have to leave a good summary and you'll be good to go. And then when you do leave, make sure you follow up and say thank you. Thank you can go a long way. As I'm presuming most of you are school committee members, you know that oftentimes the job you do is a thankless job. So it's important to remember that when you're talking to your legislator as well, as it is oftentimes the case for them as well. So saying thank you can go a long way when you're going and lobbying up at the State House. So with that, I guess we'll leave some time for questions and discussion. Just wanted to see if you have a question, you can drop it in the Q&A. If not, we can wrap up a few minutes early before the 1 o'clock hour. So we'll see if anyone has a question. Of course, you can always reach us at the office anytime, Monday to Friday. And I know there are plenty of cell phones numbers listed on our staff pages for our field directors who are listening in for Glenn. And we're happy to talk about this and any other issue that comes up for you. Let's see. I've got a question here from Joanna. She wants to know, is it appropriate to advocate to increase the reimbursement rate of the special education circuit breaker from 75% to 90%? Big thumbs up from Glenn, so I'll let him take that one.
Yeah, without question. The special education circuit breaker is popular because everybody gets something. The wealthiest communities get something, the poorest communities get something. And it's very popular with legislators, but it still leaves a good chunk of the change for you to cover locally. And you don't have the capacity to raise revenue as the legislature might. So we think this is a very important goal for us to pursue, and it's totally appropriate to be asking for this.
Okay, got another question from Nancy who says, I'm totally intimidated about going to talk to my legislators or their staff. They probably understand the issues better than I do. Advice for a rookie. I'll take this one. So I was a staff member for 6 years at the State House. I was the communications director for Senator O'Connor, and I was the very first face that people would see when they would come in to talk about a particular issue or just pop in to say hi. It's important to remember that the individuals that you are talking to are not necessarily experts on everything. There are over 6,000 bills filed every legislative session. There's simply no way that every legislator and every staff member up there knows all 6,000 bills. It's impossible. So usually what happens is legislators and their staff will rely on people who are more directly impacted by the outcome of a particular bill or area to come in and give them that information. Um, so I wouldn't even necessarily see it as, well, I've never talked to my legislator before. Well, I've never talked to their staff before. Uh, they're just regular people and they'd be happy to talk with you about any issue that you have and listen to your perspective on it. Most notably, as school committee members, you walk in with a level of authority on a particular issue. You, in your own right, are often elected officials or appointed, and you serve the same constituents that these legislators serve. So don't be intimidated by it. I know it can feel odd at first, but for anyone that's ever run a political race, if you're starting door knocking for the very first time in your life, that is also very intimidating. But you get over it and it'll all be okay. Got another question here from Ashley. She says, thank you. This was really helpful. As a new school committee member, I feel like I'm learning a lot through these Friday meetings. Most of what you are advocating for are the same things that our community wants and needs as well. Sounds like I'm in the right place. Thank you for the comment, Ashley. We appreciate it. And that's sort of the whole point, is that the priorities we're talking about come from our membership. These are not things that we pull out of thin air and decide this is something that we should do. It comes directly from the members. And just as a reminder, the deadline for submitting a resolution to the delegate assembly in November, I want to say is June 1st. So in your own school committee, if there's an area or an issue that you would like to see MASC take up, you can write a resolution, say that it's for submission to the MASC delegate assembly, and give us a copy of that particular issue, and then it'll go through that timeline process that we had discussed earlier in the presentation. Mona, where is the list of the MASC legislative priorities? We do have those listed online under the advocacy tab on our website, but following this meeting as well, I will hyperlink to the status update document that we have so you can see what was passed, what resolution was passed each year, what was the intent of that resolution, and what is the existing status update of that resolution. Fred has a question that I think, Glenn, you may be able to answer.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
this
just
is
read it out here for him. Is we seem to have a major cost with busing of homeless McKinney-Vento students, which is increasing transportation costs statewide. Is there anything we can do to receive funding based on these extended costs that can be overwhelming to the school district?
yes, this is the answer to a trivia question. Funding for McKinney-Vento students funds a program that is the only program to have been declared an unfunded mandate by the state auditor in over 25 years. And the state legislature has started putting more and more money into the McKinney-Vento account. So it is a priority for us. We do lobby for that, and it is on our radar screen. Is there enough there? Can they fully fund it? Can they fully fund the obligation that they're supposed to with a legislative appropriation? I don't know. There are so many requests. And one other really quick thing, remember, your local legislator is confronted with anywhere between 200 and 300 different kinds of policy questions. We think about education. We don't think about how Medicaid pays its providers. We don't think about how opticians are regulated. Depending upon where you are in the public sector, your issue can be as important as can be. So legislators can't possibly know all of these different areas of public policy. And that's why you should take the time to explain. Most members of the legislature probably don't know the history of McKinney-Vento. So if you're familiar with it and you can bring it to their attention, that can help change minds when it comes time to making decisions in committee and making decisions last through the approval process.
One other question, just as a reminder for folks. Yes, so the at Day on the Hill on Monday, if you were joining us, we'll have hard copies of all this stuff. I know I got the fun task alongside Glenn and members of the team of assembling all the folders with the hard copies in them. So we have those ready to go for you on Monday. Well, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, so I would just say that we're 5 minutes shy of 1 o'clock. I want to thank Glenn, our executive director, for joining us and pinch hitting at the last minute for us. We appreciate that, and I want to say thank you to all of you who attended today for the learning lunch on our legislative update. And we're wishing you a good rest of your day and a good weekend, and hopefully we'll see you on Monday.